Did you know at Kroger, shopping online with pickup and delivery is the same as shopping in store? Same low prices, same personalized deals, same rewards, with no hidden fees or markups on your same family favorites, like Honeycrisp apples and pasta sauce. The only difference is you don't have to put on shoes. Start your cart today at Kroger.com. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Conway Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in and a little programming. Now, oh, by the way, don't forget, you can always read my work on ESPN.com. Have a story up right now about two big hires that Washington has made tonight. In fact, the second one caused me to re-record this podcast because it was announced, or it came out as soon as I was done wrapping up my discussion about Kliff Kingsbury. And then along comes Joe Whitt Jr. as a defensive coordinator. I'm going to get to those guys in a minute, but a couple things. Bram Weinstein and I, the voice of the Commanders, we're going to do a live stream show Monday night, 8:00, wrapping up another big day for the Commanders with Dan Quinn being introduced as the new head coach at 2:30 p.m. Press conference. We'll have more information on maybe some other coaches, all that good stuff. I know Eric Bieniemy is still the coordinator. A lot of people ask me about him, and suffice to say, he's not the coordinator here anymore. I don't have no clue what his role is going to be. I think you can take a big leap from here to see what it's going to be. Anyways, but new staff coming in here. Two big holes have been filled on the staff. Let's get to that right now. Let's start with, to me, the big one, because Joe Whitt was the expected one for the defensive coordinator. That was the first name you heard. And I had heard that, I'd been told before Quinn was hired that this was the guy he was telling other teams that he was going to hire as his defensive guy. So, well, I'll get to him in a minute, but I think there's a lot more to discuss with Kliff Kingsbury because the importance of him being the offense coordinator. And also we know Dan Quinn is a defensive coach. He's going to have a hand in all that, but let's get to Kingsbury. So a couple of things here that jump out. One, he's experienced with young quarterbacks. He drafted and developed Kyler Murray in Arizona. Now the two had some issues at the end, it sounded like, but they certainly made that offense work for a few years. And he has experience with him and developing young quarterbacks. He worked with Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech, Baker Mayfield at Texas Tech, Caleb Williams at USC last year. I'm going to get to that situation in a minute because I know that's a topic of interest for everybody. So, but that's one of the bonuses of Kingsbury. He's worked with this young talent. Now, I've heard positive things about him. I haven't talked to a lot of people about Kingsbury, so I don't want to go too hard on that. I will say, like I did that with Quinn, I was kind of adamant. I told you guys a lot of times how much I'd hear about him because I talked to more than a dozen people in the league, various roles about him. And it was the same thing all over. Can't go there with Kingsbury because I don't know. I do know that people like this. A lot of people do like this offense. Is it for everybody? I don't think so because it can be different. So it's certainly not traditional, but it has evolved over the years. So I'll get more into the X's and O's of that when I have other people come on, whether it's Logan or other people come on to talk about that, who know a lot more about it than I do, people who are more versed in that offense than I am. But I think that experience of working with young quarterbacks is key for a team that has the number 2 pick in the draft. I'm going to talk about that in a few seconds as well. The one thing I wonder, I guess if there's a downside here. First of all, you get an experienced guy. You get a guy who's been a head coach in the league on the offensive side of the ball. So for Dan Quinn, you shouldn't have to worry about that side of the ball. You have to stay involved in it, though. I'm not going to sit here and say, because what did Ron Rivera do? He hired an experienced defensive coordinator. Now, it's not a 1-for-1 here. This is not a 2.0. So that's a tired phrase. It's not accurate. But I understand, other stuff. But on this situation, I think that can help a Dan Quinn when you have a guy like that has been in that role and has been in this league and can help you out with some things. Doesn't mean you have to ignore that side of the ball. You shouldn't do that. And I think, that's one reason why for Joe Whitt being the defensive coordinator, it does allow Quinn to be more to, kind of jump into both areas when he needs to, when he needs to and how. So, but I think if you look at, is there a downside here? Well, of course, there's a downside to everything every guy that gets hired in the NFL. But the one thing here would be, what if Kingsbury, what if they go out there and they draft, Drake May or whatever, Caleb Williams, and they go out and have a really good year? Well, then does Kingsbury get hired as a head coach for another team if they're going to go draft a young quarterback, right? Or if they have a young quarterback? Is that a possibility? Well, of course it's a possibility. Is it likely? I don't know, because there's a long way to go in all this. But that's the one downside for a guy like Kingsbury. Would he want to be a head coach again? Would he go back to college and do that? I'm guessing maybe he had some opportunities. I don't know that. But if he did, he's certainly staying in the NFL. Well, he was there in USC last year, but he could have stayed in college probably if he had wanted to. Certainly was looking for NFL jobs. Would he want to try and be a head coach again? Most guys do. So that's the one thing to watch. So if that's the case, you better have an offensive staff where you can elevate and you don't have to then change systems. It seems like, other people would be better served to talk about this, but my knowledge seems like you go when in Atlanta for Quinn, kind of went from one system to another, and the offense kind of hit some rough spots because of it. So how are you going to position yourself so that doesn't happen again? First of all, you want it to go well. You would, if Kingsbury gets another head coaching job, it's because this offense did really well and they have a quarterback that he did well with. So keep that in mind. Keep some perspective here. You kind of want one of those guys to be in demand, but I know the problem is that means, are you going to start over in another offense? So you better have somebody who's versed in that offense who can ascend to a certain role if it goes that way in the next year or two, right? So that's one thing. That's one of the big deals here. The one thing to know too is the air raid offense, air raid passing game, right? Here's something you need to know about how it evolved in Arizona. During his tenure in Arizona, the Cardinals ranked 11th in the number of rush attempts. All right, that's over 4 years combined. So they were 11th overall combined over 4 years in rush attempts, 10th in yards per carry, 10th in rushing yards per game, 9th in yards per carry. So those are good running game numbers. The hard part to know without really studying the offense or talking to people who know more than I do, that how does a Brian Robinson or Chris Rodriguez fit into this style of offense? I think I would have some questions there if that would be the best fit for those guys, but more would have to be learned. And, the other thing is, like a lot of times in college, the air raid did not use the tight ends as much. He did over in Arizona. The number of attempts for the tight ends there increased dramatically over his time there. So I don't think it's some sort of death sentence for that position at all. It's just a matter of getting the right guys in there. And it's funny because I bring up the run stuff too. I was talking to a coach the other night about what he thought Quinn would look for in a coordinator. And this is a guy who coached with him in Atlanta. He said he definitely thought he would want a guy who would want to run the ball more. So Kingsbury's evolved in that. It's not a traditional rushing attack, but they have done a little bit more with some under center, some play action. But that's something I'm going to have to go back and study more of, rather than kind of, talking about it on the fly on a Sunday night. Now, how does this pertain to Caleb Williams? Because obviously Washington has the number 2 pick. Caleb Williams is right there at the number 1 pick. Can you get up there? Well, there's a couple things. One, we still don't know what Chicago is going to do. Let's assume Chicago does. If Caleb Williams is that good, why would Chicago pass on him? You have a chance to reset the clock on a quarterback versus having to pick up Justin Fields or make the decision on his 5th-year option this offseason, so that you get 5 years with the guy versus 2 years with the guy before you really have to pay him. And, but let's say they stick with Justin Fields. Well, then you can have a chance to trade up. But if that pick is up for grabs, more teams are going to try and trade up. Why is that important? Because you have to give up more than to go up one spot. It's not like you say, oh, here's a 4th-round pick, go. You're going to have to give up a decent amount, because what if New England wants to move up there too? You're going to have a couple of teams. What if Atlanta wants to move up there? Atlanta is in a position where you have a good roster around them. I don't know if they'd want to do that, but what if they do, to go up from 8 to 1? So if you're Chicago and you say, if you're willing to trade that, you don't, do you need to go to number 2? You could go from 1 to 2 and then keep trading back a couple of times, because if you're not getting a quarterback, you don't have to be in one of those top 3 spots. So you can trade out of there if you want to. So you may have some teams there, more teams willing to trade up for that pick. So if you're Washington, here's what I know. They want to build through the draft. I've heard that multiple times privately and publicly. They want to build through the draft. Do you want to give up multiple high picks to move up to that spot? That would be the question. Is Caleb Williams that good that you're willing to do that? And then, the other part of that is people here know that they need a lot of work on this roster. This is not a roster where it's like, oh, just come in here and change the coaches, you're going to win. They need some work. They know this is not an overnight success situation because of where the roster is at. So are you really going to want to try and give up that much to move up one spot? Or here's the other part of it. Do you stay at number 2 and you have Sam Howell, and here's another quarterback, Drake May, both of whom played in an air raid offense at North Carolina? That's the offense that Kliff Kingsbury will run in Washington. And why is that important? Well, I mean, obviously it's important because they have experience in it. Duh. It's kind of my own dumb question. But here's the other part of it. Phil Longo, who coached both May and Howell at Carolina, has pretty strong ties to Kingsbury. In fact, I texted him tonight and say, like, hey, how similar is your offense to what Kingsbury wants to do? And I know it's an air raid, but there's always variations of it. He said it's very similar. And he's like, kind of give me a thumbs up, said this should be exciting. So he clearly thinks that both those guys could do something with a Kingsbury. And I don't know what the plan is at all. So my only point in this is saying, do not assume that this was just done to go up and get Caleb Williams. You wanted to do something different. You have another quarterback that you like. Let's say they don't like these quarterbacks. Let's say Kingsbury doesn't like Drake May. But here's the other thing. He's good friends. He knows Longo very well. So he's going to get a great scouting report from Longo on both these guys. Longo used to go meet with Mike Leach in the spring. Mike Leach is obviously the god, one of the big creators of this air raid offense. So he'd go there in the spring to meet with him. Kingsbury would often be there as well. Longo used to sit in on meetings, on quarterback meetings that Longo, when Kingsbury was a coach, I think it was at Texas Tech, he would sit in on the quarterback meetings. They have a good relationship. They would talk a lot. So he's going to have really good insight into May and how they can run this offense. So now, what if Kingsbury decides he doesn't like me? He doesn't like these quarterbacks for his offense. Then now you start to get into other scenarios, trading backs, free agents, whatever it is. But the point is, this was not just done to go get Caleb Williams. There are other options out there, and I think it could be pretty intriguing what now takes place at the quarterback position for Washington. Now, as far as Joe Whitt goes, now he's not a guy I know a ton about. What I do know is on Friday I texted with another person who works for an NFC team, very familiar with Dallas. And I just asked him, like, what did you think of the Quinn hire? He said, he came back, all caps, excellent hire. But he also mentioned Joe Whitt, because at that point you knew that Whitt was the number one candidate to join Quinn here as a defensive coordinator. So he mentioned him. He said he talked to some people in Dallas and about how disappointed they were because they were going to now be losing 2 quality coaches. So they knew at that time that this was probably going to happen. And let me see if I can read you what he said. He said, I was talking with the Dallas staff and they are so bummed to lose him. They were mocking the negative sentiments about him because the way the season ended and noting how dumb that narrative is. Yes, I think I would agree with him on that. But he also had mentioned too about Whitt. And so like that's a big hit to that Dallas staff. But now Washington has him. Whitt, I'm going to get into more on him in future episodes. But for tonight, here's what you need to know. He's been in the coaching in the league since 2007. Has been a passing game coordinator for three different teams since 2018, has been with Quinn since 2020. He joined him in Atlanta. Then he came over in Dallas and joined him there. They built a very good defense in Dallas. for whatever happened in that last game, which to judge a guy on one game is just ridiculous. But in their 3 years there, Dallas's defense was third in quarterback rating against them and third in completion percentage against them. I think they were like top 5 or 6 or something like that in passing yards allowed per game. So in all the passing metrics, they rank very high. Very good talent. I know Micah Parsons, and they made that defense work because of how they created it and because of some of the pressure they created and the way that Quinn would use his guys and the way, and certainly that secondary is very good. You saw, what they did this year, and they led the league by a decent amount with 93 turnovers. I think it was 93 turnovers caused during those 3 years. So that's who's coming to Washington. Whitt, again, was the number one guy that you heard all along. So this is not a surprise. Kingsbury, a big surprise, because on Saturday, he was going to Las Vegas. So everybody that's worried about, who do they want or who's not coming here or whatever, spurning this team, that whatever, they got a guy that was going to go to another team, backed out of that because of contract talks ostensibly broke down. Then immediately Washington was talking to him. Now he's with the Commanders, and there are too many narratives out there right now. And I will say this too about the narratives about Quinn, and I'm harping on this because I just think there's a lot of misinformation out there. They did not settle for Quinn. That's a silly notion. Quinn from the beginning was one of their top picks. If I had to rank them, I'd say probably Ben Johnson first, Quinn second at the start of this process. Going into last week, I don't know that order was the same, because I think that Johnson would have needed a really strong interview to get the job, an in-person interview to get the job, because Quinn was impressive in his first interview as well as his second, when he had that second interview before they were flying to Detroit to meet with him. So just, the idea that all these guys left and somehow they got stuck with Quinn is just not accurate. So anyways, I know some of you aren't going to believe that anyway, so you can believe whatever you want. Just telling you what I know. And this is not just coming from the Commanders. So when I tell you that stuff, I'm getting it from people who know people, and they tell them the truth, who then tells me more what's going on. So there you go, folks. That's it from me. Again, 8:00 Monday night, Eastern time, another live stream with Bram Weinstein, the voice of the Commanders. So, and 2:30 press conference with Dan Quinn. Talk to you next time.